One. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 131 today. And I'm here with my guest, Sarah from DD Geopolitics. How are you doing today, Sarah?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm okay today, Sarah. I've just been, I went out for a bit of a walk today, did some cleaning. How about you? What did you do today?
I'm trying to read this book that I'm not really enjoying, so I've been trying to push my way through it. So that's what I was trying to do today.
What's the book you're reading called, and what's it about?
It's called White Malice. It's about the CIA and Africa. And it's just very verbose. It's just, I feel like this book could have been half the length and it would have still been the same. So I'm like trying to get through it. It's just, it's just like unnecessary backgrounds and like segues. And I'm like, this doesn't pertain to this story at all. Like it could have been so much shorter and it's like 500 pages. So I'm just like pushing really hard. So that's what I did.
You're doing a good job. You're being able. What would you say, from reading that book? Have you one fact from that book that you found very fascinating? Like one part of the book that you really found interesting?
Well, I didn't know that Ghana was the first African country to really push forward an independence and Pan-Africanism, and I didn't know that. I thought it was a different country. And not only that, but how involved and how because we look at Africa now, right? We're taught in the West that Africa as a continent is just a third world, violent, and we don't know much about it. But reading about the independence movements and how developed the countries were and how people from America were coming over to Ghana to learn about what they were doing. And Martin Luther King came over and his wife, and Bob Marley's wife came over and became a citizen. And it was a humongous celebratory movement. And I didn't realize that it was very, very much, they were trying to create a United States of Africa. And basically the United States stopped them. The United States of America stopped them. But it's neat in that sense, because I didn't realize. I know
Sarah,
a lot. Yeah.
Let's not forget Joe Biden went. Nah, just kidding. Just like how he said he went to the Nelson Mandela.
He's been everywhere. He's had fighters and he's been in wars and he's been everywhere. But I know a lot about the freedom fighters of Africa and the freedom movements, but I didn't realize they were all working together and learning from one another. So that's kind of a really neat bit about it, is that they were all kind of mentoring each other and working together. And of course the CIA can't have that. So that's what the book's about, is the CIA kind of infiltrating these independence movements and assassinating leaders and stuff like that. So yeah.
Who out of all the independent movements, what would you say which one really had the most influential and the most success at pushing Pan-Africanism forward and being free from the globalist control, the one that's had the most influence going in today's world?
For Africa, I would probably say Gaddafi, only because he was so recent and so many lessons were gleaned from that. There's been a ton of independence movements in African history. Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Nkrumah, of course, Mandela, who's actually in Africa is one of the lesser ones, but he's just a household name in the West. But there's been so many independence movements. But I think that the philosophy of Gaddafi is the one that's been the most influential, and also the lessons learned from the fall of Gaddafi. You now see leaders very much, they'll mention him, or, in reverence, or so I think he's very much an inspiration in African movements even today, especially learning from, I wouldn't say his mistakes, but his mistakes or his learning from his ultimate, from his downfall. So
when you look at Africa, when you've studied about African politics, or whether it's been African mythology, what would you say is your favorite quote from an African leader, and what would you say African politics does better from the West that the West could learn from?
I have to pull it up. It's from, hold on one second, because I don't want to get it wrong.
For me, I would have to say Colonel Gaddafi did very good things. He did a lot of good show. Did you manage to get the quote yet?
Yeah, it's Thomas Sankara. It's while revolutionaries as individuals can be murdered, you cannot kill ideas. And the reason why I love this quote so much is because he was murdered. Just to like he was the independence leader for Burkina Faso. And he was murdered, and he's just a very, very inspirational. He's my favorite of the African American or African freedom fighters. I just find him to be very selfless and very much in tune with the people of Burkina Faso. And the reason why I picked him is because you can very much see his legacy being carried on through the president now, which is Ibrahim Traore, who has cited Thomas Sankara in his speeches. He's talked about him, and even most recently, they did like political analysts in Burkina Faso did an analysis of him and actually put him up next to Thomas Sankara as a comparison. So I really like that continuity, and that he's drawing from a man that was very successful. You know, he was successful because he was murdered by his enemies by a Western intelligence plot. That's how you know that they're making changes and becoming in tune with the people. So yeah, that's probably my favorite independence movement out of Africa.
When you look at Africa right now as a continent, and you like look at countries like, for instance, Rwanda is being told as an economic success. Like, many people think that Rwanda is going to become like the Switzerland of Africa. Like, it's so beautiful, so clean there. You also have Morocco that is having a lot of potential. Algeria like is doing very well. You've also got also Nigeria, even though they've got their problems. And like you said, you know, what's another African country that's doing well? I think it's also, when you look at like the future of Africa, how do you think like the future of Africa is going to be? And where do you see like, you know, South Africa going? Do you think South Africa is going to get any better, or do you think it's looking bleak for South Africa compared to the top of Africa, like places like Ghana, Guinea, and like Nigeria, and like Morocco and Rwanda?
I think that when we look at Africa, we really need to look at it in at least 3 sections, if not 5. So just to keep it simple, we'll do 3, and that would be like your Arab Africa, which is Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, kind of up there. Then your Central Africa, or the Sahel, which is we'll just include the western parts too. So it's like Guinea, Ghana, Niger, Nigeria, and then like you have your East Africa, which will
Tongo, there's Tongo too.
Yeah, and then your East Africa, which is like Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and then your South, which is obviously South Africa, and then like Tanzania and stuff like that. But they're completely 3 different, humongously different cultures, and they need each other. So the thing in the Sahel going on right now is they're creating their own African alliance, and that will probably push forward their own version of NATO, if you will. The northern African countries are looking at entering BRICS. We know Algeria will enter soon. We have South Africa already in there, and Ethiopia, the big surprise. So I see Africa as a continent moving, doing that NATO thing that I can't remember what it's called. It's like the alliance of something African states, I think. Right now, it's just
African. They mention African United States. They kind of said something like that, or like, because it's some Twitter post about that.
I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it's Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. And they said that, you know, we're forming this alliance, and we welcome everybody else to join it. So I'm sure eventually more people will join. That's a military alliance, and then they need to join BRICS as an economic alliance. And in doing that, yeah, and you're starting to see some of those waves happening where the United States is no longer going to give aid, is threatening to pull aid from Egypt. Same as Ethiopia. You know, so Africa needs to join BRICS and integrate into the world through that avenue, that economic avenue.
So right now, as we all know, there's a kind of coups going on in Africa called decolonization. So of course you got the coups that happened this year, which was in Niger and I think it's in Gombo, and then you got the other country you mentioned in 2022, and then you got Guinea, Malawi, and Chad. What would you say, like, out of these colonization things, coups that are happening, what would you say is the biggest lie that the Western media has portrayed, over these leaders, trying to basically tell, say the Western media is saying that these leaders, like of Niger, are crazy and lunatics? What would you say is the biggest lie that the Western media says about them?
I think that they try to portray them as like these military. They always want to call them a junta or a regime. And they use those words on purpose. But the Western portrayal of Africans as savages, and I mean, for the region in the West is known as the coup belt. It's because we're like, oh, another African coup, because we don't take anything seriously. Especially this leader in Burkina Faso who has already thwarted multiple coups. The people support him 100%. There's constantly parades, constantly celebrations. They just had their 1-year anniversary of his leadership. And still the West tries to disparage him. And that is, I don't want to say that it's racist, but it's such a like aloof attitude. And it says like these, even though these African people support their leaders, support these military governments, military administrations, we know better than them, right? Those leaders aren't good for them. They don't know. And that's the thing that the West always tries to portray. We've got to step in and save these Africans from themselves. They don't know any better. And that's the biggest lie. It's time to let Africa develop on its own. It's time to allow Africa to have control over their natural resources as they see fit. And if they mess up, then they mess up. And that's their business. Like, it's just time. It's time to let them make their own mistakes. And it's time to stop making the mistakes for them. If you ever have the opportunity to talk to somebody from Africa, they're some of the most politically literate people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to.
Who would you say is your favorite one that you've spoken to, like your favorite conversation that you've had with
I've interviewed the teacher from Niger during the coup, which was incredible because he was not an elite. He wasn't in the military, no way connected to the new government. And just he would say things like, oh, they're gonna stop the electricity, but we'll stand here as long as we have to until the French leave. And the French finally did leave. Like, that's a humongous story of triumph, that people were active every single day. They didn't have electricity. Some people couldn't get food, and they were like, we're still gonna keep going. We're still gonna keep going. So that was probably my favorite person. But I've ran a lot of African spaces, and I just meet some incredible people that it's incredible. It's like they must sit around all the time and talk about politics because they are so politically literate, and the way that they understand ideology and theory is like miles ahead. And that's another thing, is that we actually, you and I were talking about it before we even started this episode, but in the Western political science is like schizophrenic. Nobody understands anything they learn, what they learn about politics.
It's because the West has embraced the my truth, your truth belief, which is a type of ideology that was one of the reasons that helped the Roman Empire collapse, the Mongol Empire, and many empires collapse. The pseudo-science belief, where if you compare like China and Africa and Russia and a lot of Asian countries, they still stick, and even the Middle East still stick to the truth. Is truth ideology, and that's been the biggest problem with the West, and all that going forward.
We've kind of disfigured ourselves. We've turned ourselves into complete pretzels, trying to demonize communism because of the USSR, right? We've also twisted ourselves into pretzels to believe that everything that we ever did was out of the goodness of our own hearts. And we've also done mental gymnastics in order to believe that capitalism and meritocracy are the two best systems. And we're seeing now that they just aren't. So we're stuck with this politically, I won't say all of them obviously in the United States, but for the most part a politically illiterate population that's overworked, underpaid, miserable, and
Mhm.
kept in the dark on purpose, fed poison food, no health care, no future, no schooling, no nothing. Um, and that's by design, right? So, but then we have these incredible people from the global south and Africa that are so in tune with politics, um, that it's incredible, and we look down on them from America, which just boggles my mind. It's like they people here don't even know what's going on in the world. They're so consumed with whether Trump's going to be indicted or whether Joe Biden's going to run, and like the entire world is changing around us, and there's so many things happening that are so much more important than what's going on here. I think I'm going off on a tangent, so I'm really
No,
sorry.
no, keep talking. It's fine. You're saying how you feel. That's all good. That's what I want my guests to do on the show.
But yeah, I think that it's all by design. And we're seeing the consequences of that right now. The absolute degradation of American society. I won't even call it culture. I don't believe the United States has much of a culture other than a consumer culture.
Why
Um,
would you say? Why would you say that the United States has not had a culture? Is it because of like the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that turned it into a corporation, or is it because a lot of people will say that the United States, its history was built on slavery. Some people said it doesn't. At the same time, a lot of it was, built like from immigrants. And let's not forget, Sarah, a lot of conservatives will be like, oh, communism is bad, communism is good. But at the same time, though, like when you look at the Pledge of Allegiance, that was made by a socialist. When you look at a lot of working stuff, that was made by socialists. Like when you look at that, like what would you say is the biggest thing that annoys you? Like so going back to the topic, what would you say, like when you said about America having no culture, do you think it does? And what is the one thing that annoys you that conservatives say when they say like, oh, America should not be socialist, but at the same time they ignore the fact that socialists created the Pledge of Allegiance and all the other stuff? What would you say to that?
we have the most annoying thing that conservatives say about communism. Probably that Joe Biden is a communist. That like just is like nails against a chalkboard for me. And there's this weird idea of cultural Marxism that they've been applying to everything. So that's kind of annoying. um, Also, you have to realize that our labor, like people, and I was actually talking to my girlfriend from the United Kingdom recently, and she asked me about unions, and I had to laugh. I was like, unions? Like, we're not allowed to have those here. Like, what are you kidding? Like, our labor movements our labor movements were completely crushed. Um, we had labor parties. We had a
This
socialist
is in the
party.
USA, right? The USA or England?
This is the United States,
Oh,
and
yes.
they were completely crushed and obliterated. The
How
social
come? How did that happen? Was it because of the Red Scare,
No,
or
I think it was it started before that with the capitalists who were kind of like I don't know like the history of New Zealand in that sense, but during our humongous financial boom, people just got so rich, like tremendously rich, like there were like 20 so many thousand Elon Musks, like obscenely rich, and then the people were poor, and the people start coming together, and they're like asking for a 5-day work week, and they're asking for child labor laws, and they're asking for women's rights, and the cap or like the owner class is like, we can't have them asking for these things and then stop like general striking and stop working, like no. So instead of like capitulating or working with the workers, they would just crush these workers movements. I mean, we had a man run for president from prison, and he was in prison for being a socialist. So
who is that? Who is that?
Eugene Debs, I can't
Yeah.
remember the exact date that he ran for president, but he was a socialist populist, and he was arrested for being such. So, and then framed for a crime that he didn't commit, and he ran for office from prison, and that was part of crushing these labor movements. We are not allowed to have like a very, very strong labor movement or a workers movement, or even unionizing in some places is almost illegal or just completely frowned upon. So that's a very, very awful thing about America, and we really lack a lot of workers' rights. And even now we have a strike going on with auto workers. And instead of what like a normal person should do, which would be to support them, right, as they ask for more livable wages from their employer, people just complain because it's inconveniencing them. And that's one of the things that really, really like grinds my gears about America, is that we don't, because we crushed all of our labor movements and we were never allowed to have a real socialist party or a communist movement or anything of that nature. We have no idea how to work together. We have no idea how to put aside what we want for the greater good. We have no idea how to support each other. I can't tell you how many times they've tried to create general strikes. They'll never happen here because they require an enormous amount of like cohesion and working together. This is probably so depressing, but we're never going to have that here because we don't have any sort of communal or communist values. We don't know how to work together. We don't know how to sacrifice our own wants for the greater good. And that's why you look at countries like Russia or China, and they're like I remember when McDonald's closed in Russia and everybody in America is like, haha, no McDonald's. And Russians are like, what? We don't care about McDonald's. And it was so strange to have Americans be like, haha, you can't buy this stuff. And people in Russia are like, we don't care. Like, we don't care. I mean, you probably remember Lydia is very much like that. She's like, if it's for the greater good, then what do we care?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
That's how China is too, and China does the same thing. Then we'll just
same thing with Vietnam, same thing with Cuba and Venezuela. You know, I mean, well, Cuba has had a bit of a struggle because they're a small island, but
yeah.
I mean, it is very interesting, you know, and I really think, you know, the United States does need to get better workers' rights. I mean, to hear that as a libertarian myself who doesn't agree with everything on socialism, that's just stupid. You know, the United States has got to do better than that. It's got to treat the working classes better. It's got to give people better rights, you know, and it's absolutely outrageous. So, Sarah, a long time ago, so just I think it was last year, earlier on this year, it was in August, Haas, as you know, he brought up, and there's other people I saw, brought up the idea of America becoming economist. Sorry if I got it wrong, the pronunciation, sorry I butchered the pronunciation there, but like becoming a Marxist country. So Haas brought up an interesting point on Twitter a long time ago called the Red Plan to Fix America, where he said he would dismantle all the federal agencies. He would also, you know, replace Congress with a grand people's assembly, beginning with the town hall. I'll just bring up some things, not all of it. And he basically said, get rid of the banking Federal Reserve, which most people actually agree with. We should get rid of. When you look at that idea that Haas says about America being an economist nation, like how, you know, they should replace Congress with a town hall and stuff, like when you look at that idea, how do you think America would be like as an economist nation? Do you think it should be economist nation? How do you think it would be like socially, economically? And how will America being an economist nation, how will it fix its domestic problems, social problems, health problems, and like how would it fix it?
I can't really speak to Haas's ideology, although I do love it. The kind of MAGA communism. Haas's idea, as far as I can tell, and he's so much smarter than me, so I'm going to mess this up, is very much tailoring communism to the United States. And I absolutely 100% agree in the sense that not saying that communism is going to work in the United States, but saying that we're so afraid of communism in the West because when we hear communism, all we think about is Stalin, right? That's like immediately when you think of Stalin.
And people will say that communism is like authoritarianism, which it's not. It's not. It's just ridiculous.
They immediately think of Stalin or Mao, and it's kind of like, okay, well, every country that has communism kind of, just like any other political ideology, they tailor that to work in their society as such. That's why in China it's called socialism with Chinese characteristics, because it's specific to China. That's why in Nicaragua it's called Christian socialism, because that's what Nicaragua implemented. So all these communists or Juche in North Korea, all of these communist states tailor it to themselves. So that's Haas's kind of idea to integrate, somehow to create a communism that is unique to America and that would work here. Do I think that communism will work here? No. I am not a utopian person. And when it comes to the United States, I'm quite black-pilled. We don't have a culture that supports that. I mean, even our culture is so much built on, if you work hard enough, you'll get rich. Not if you work hard enough, the community around you will be better. Or if you work hard enough and you develop this technology, it's for the greater good. It's for the world or the nation. We don't operate like that. We operate on, you come up with the idea, you patent it, you make a bajillion dollars. Now you're Elon Musk, and that's it. You're rich. Like, that's like how people in the United States function. It's a meritocracy, or a false meritocracy, capitalistic, very much individualistic society. And for communism to even begin to work here, would need an entire revolution. You would need to completely collapse the system and rebuild it, because you'd need to be rebuilding the culture. The culture is capitalistic and consumerist. So I don't know how you would change that. It would take lifetimes. It would take at least a couple generations. I mean, even you see, like, communism fell in the Soviet Union in the 90s. And you see in Russians, there's still very much of a communal kind of vibe, a communal undertow. So
Sarah, tell me about, DD Geopolitics, and tell me your journey into politics, right? So what made you come up with the name, and how did you become a socialist? And, like, what would you said led you into the road of becoming a socialist, like preferring that over to, like, conservatism and other stuff?
I think I'm socially conservative. I'm just not fiscally conservative. So I think I'm more so on the social conservative scale in the United States, I would say. Maybe in other places I'd be considered normal or centrist or even leftist, but in the United States, I'm definitely socially conservative. I served in the military here in the United States. And watching the destruction and the amount of resources that the United States not only takes from other countries, but the United States military takes from its own citizens, that's kind of what pushed me quite over the edge. So in terms of disenchantment, I think that I saw enough being in the military, wastefulness, money, like kind of like manipulation. There's a lot of like mental and like mental abuse that goes on in the military. It's just, there were a lot of things, and I felt like this is such a direct reflection of the society that we live in, that I was like, this has got to change. So I wouldn't call myself a socialist. Maybe I always say communist, because if we took libertarian in the real sense of the word when it was first created and the socialists used the word, then maybe I'm more like that, or maybe like conservative communist, but I'm definitely not a socialist. But I think that it was the military, honestly, that pushed me that far left, because you just see, I always say that you see the way the sausage is made. You see how the parts move eventually when you make enough rank. You see how the money's spent, and you're just like, this is so corrupt and crazy. We're talking about almost $1 trillion military budget. You won't believe the kind of money that we spend on the most frivolous things. A $70 screw that I could get at a department store for like $1, stuff like that. So it's just so much waste, so much corruption, and so much crap. And we're not doing anything abroad that's advancing society as a whole. We're actually engaging in massive destruction, and then denying that we're doing it, which is the worst part about it, or pretending that it's for their own good, or in the case of like Iraq, where we just destroyed the whole place and then got up and we're like, oh, sorry, the contract.
Whether it was Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Yugoslavia, Somalia, even before World War II, you had the Philippines, you had Spain, you had like Vietnam, and like the bombing in Laos and Cambodia, and the fact that there's still mines killing people like in Laos and Cambodia, and even in Yugoslavia. Speaking to the Serbian girl, and she's telling me even in Yugoslavia there are still mines, even like some toxic oil that kills people in Iran. It's just the devastation of it, Sarah. It's just absolute. Sarah, when you were like in the military, what would you say like was the one heartbreaking story? Like when you did you sorry, before I get this question, did you actually go to any country?
I deployed, but I've never been like boots on the ground in combat. No, but I've deployed.
When you were like in the military, do you mind if we could talk about heartbreaking story? Because I don't want to make you,
You're fine. Heartbreaking story.
Because I know a PTSD what it sounds like. So when you were like in the military, what would you say was like one of the most heartbreaking stories you saw from like any country that you were deployed in, or like from any soldier that just made you think, what the fuck is going on here? Like one that just completely broke you mentally.
Yeah. One of my turning points was we were deployed and we were participating in the liberation of Mosul, which is just a huge bombing campaign. And a couple weeks after that campaign, they were like, there's mandatory training that you guys have to go to. I said, already, whatever, you just kind of do what you're told. And the mandatory training was just a video of them bombing indiscriminately with like rap music blaring over it. And that it wasn't a heartbreaking story for us about someone else, but it broke my heart because I was like, what are we doing? Like, this is a highlight reel of bombs being dropped on who knows what. You find out after that their amount of errors in bombing is just insane, especially under Obama. That's who was president.
Oh yeah, in like Libya, Syria, Yemen,
Yeah.
Ethiopia. And let's not forget, Donald Trump also continued it. He continued it in Yemen, Syria, and conservatives don't talk about that either. It's just
I really don't. I really stopped following American politics for the most part after the 2016 election. And that wasn't because of Donald Trump. It was just at the end of the day, being in the military, our foreign policy doesn't change.
No, it doesn't. No matter what.
And then people, I obviously I run a lot of political shows and political spaces, and people always want us, let's talk about the United States politics. Why? It doesn't matter who wins. The foreign policy is not going to change. It's still a foreign policy of absolute destruction. And and you mentioned it, Donald Trump didn't pull us out of Syria like he promised. Donald Trump didn't help Yemen like he promised, but now he's running on this promise of somehow ending the war in Ukraine, which has been impossible to end because every step of the way there's somebody.
And if he does get into office again, I have a feeling he'll take his distraction away from Ukraine and probably go to war with Iran and Taiwan and China, and probably will do the funding there. Like it would be absolutely crazy, which is just By the way, I've got some people who have commented earlier. So Nutty Professor got off this good comment. He says the United States is something permanently socialist. What do you think of that?
No, it's not. I wish it was. I wish it was socialist. We have no social safety nets here. We have nothing protecting us. We don't even take care of our veterans. There's nothing here that's socialist. Even the socialist programs are all built to fail so they can privatize them later. I mean, look at our postal service that was privatized. Our healthcare system is a shit show. Like, it's just, there's nothing socialist about it. We don't take care of anybody here unless they're wealthy. So I always think that's funny. We have already had that conversation, you know. I hear it all the time. Joe Biden is a socialist. Joe Biden is like further to the right than Trump, honestly, in his policies. So yeah.
My friend, so there's a girl I interviewed on my show, and she's a Serbian. She's very cool, and she's in Serbia right now, and she's telling me what's going on there with Kosovo and what the
Kosovo
yeah,
is Serbia. Kosovo
yeah,
is Serbia.
Kosovo, Serbia. It is Serbia, absolutely 100%. And anyone who gets triggered by that, they can go cope more.
They can get off the stream if you don't like it. Kosovo
Yeah.
is Serbia.
She's a really brave girl, and she says here she wanted to ask you a question. Hello, hi Welsh. She says here, I have a question for your guest. We have seen what has happened to Armenians backed by NATO and Turkey. Genocide will happen to Serbians in Kosovo, and NATO threatens Serbia with war. Now, I'll just say to that, I think honestly, the fact that, you know, to hear that the media is blaming Serbians on that, which is disgusting. And
The media will always blame Serbia. I don't know how old.
And you know, I just wanted to say, Sarah, that to hear that is just disgusting. So, like Lady of the Balkans was saying, when you hear us say that, how does that make you feel that the fact there could be, you know, potentially NATO and there could be another war in the Balkans? How does that make you feel? And seeing, like, you know, what NATO did to Yugoslavia and Serbia back then, how does that make you feel?
That's actually one of my like focuses of study was the fall of Serbia. My political science degree was focused on fascist movements in Eastern Europe and the communist movements as well. So I've studied Yugoslavia very extensively, and I have a very, very soft heart for Serbs. It's your second comment is preferably before Albanians cut my internet off. They don't. I don't know if they know how to do that. But you know, it's funny because every single, you know, we don't think of Serbia that often. Well, I do, but most people don't think of Serbia that often. But every single bit of political maneuvering in not only Europe but in the Caucasus and in some parts of Asia, those affect Serbia. So this recent ethnic cleansing of Artsakh in between Armenia and Azerbaijan, that is a direct threat to Serbs, and rightfully so. And you saw as soon as the ethnic cleansing started, she's got to stop commenting because I just keep laughing. They saw that when they saw the ethnic cleansings happening in Artsakh, all of my Serb friends were saying they're going to start in Kosovo, and immediately right after that was when the issues started in Kosovo. So every time something happens as either a distraction or we can push this envelope a little bit further, they will. The thing about Serbia is you know, here's what this might be like way off the beaten path, but I think Russia's actually getting stronger in terms of this war and in terms of their political stance. I don't think that they're in a position right now where they can physically defend Serbia, but I think that if it were to come down to it, somebody is going to come, and maybe it'll be China, maybe it'll be North Korea, maybe it'll be Iran, because, you know, Iran has their own interests that were affected by the conflict in Armenia and Azerbaijan. But I think that Serbia has a lot more allies now than they did in the 90s, or maybe it's the same allies, but at least those allies are stronger and in a better place, whereas NATO and the United States are weakened. But I don't know, because Albanians scare me too. So
Yeah, I've heard Albania is a very, very, very backwards country. I mean, it's full of crime, full of.
Well, I mean, that was what NATO wanted it to be. It's not just the Albanians' fault. I mean, it is and it isn't, but that's what NATO wanted them to be. They want them to be a corrupt, like, arms trafficking enclave that can never amount to anything, so they could continue to use that area and do whatever they want in Kosovo. So that was all by design. And Serbs are literally just an island in the middle of all of this, like, nonsense. And they're in the middle of NATO, they're in the middle of the EU, and they're constantly under a barrage of, like, Western globo homo woke imperialism. So I think that this go around, I don't want to make Russia into a saint, maybe it won't be Russia, but I don't think that Russia is going to allow the same thing to happen to Serbia that happened in the 90s. Maybe I'm just too hopeful, but I'd hate to see that to happen to Serbia again.
She'll be, I'll tell you, Sarah, she'll be very happy that you gave her answer to that question. She's been talking to me, and she tells me what's happening to Serbia. You know, like she's in the area where it's where the area where in Kosovo where the police, Kosovo is Serbia, in the area where the Kosovo government is targeting her, and it's just targeting her people, and it's just disgusting. But she'll be very thankful for you to answer that question. She's very happy.
Actually am doing a show on Sunday on I guess it's just changed, because originally it was going to be the Yugoslavian war and parallels to the war in Ukraine, but now with all the turmoil happening, I'm sure it'll shift more to what's happening in the Balkans right now. So author Diane Johnstone, she wrote an incredible book called Fool's Crusade about Yugoslavia. I need to reread it because it was just so good. It's about how horribly mishandled the United States did, and you have no idea the propaganda that they did against the Serbs here, the things that they said about Serbs.
They also blame Serbs for World War One, and I'm thinking, no, they didn't start World War One. What a load of nonsense!
Oh yeah,
you know. And she says here, Lady of the Balkans also says here, this is what she's bringing up the situation. She says 4 Serbs were killed in a monastery from 2 weeks ago, 20 kilometers away from my house. Kurda's a madman need ever. USA knows that, and they are trying to contain him, and they are falling. Yeah, the Kosovo guy they're basically talking about. And then she says here, for 2 weeks now here in Kosovo, where I live, where I was born, so-called PM, you know, that guy, Kosovo Prime Minister, has closed borders with Central Serbia, and Kosovo is getting no food and no medicals. That's absolutely unbelievable. When you look at like that Kosovo leader who's doing that, do you think he's trying to basically become like the next President Lisinski? Because a lot of people conferred, you know, the Kosovo leader to pretty much becoming like another Lisinski.
I don't know what the ultimate end game is for him personally, but the idea of further ethnic cleansing of the Serbs from Kosovo, and then for Kosovo to be entirely Albanian, is so ludicrous and so ridiculous that if the world allows that to happen, I think I'm going to give up, because the Serbs were ethnically cleansed from there in the 90s. So if we're not ready to like admit that that's what's happened and rectify that, I don't know how we move forward. Like that, if that erupts in the Balkans, that could be the fall of the EU. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I really don't want to see Serbia get trampled again by a bunch of ridiculous, like egotistical powers. I'm just hoping that it can either be contained or that someone with at least a rational mind steps in. Because America, while they say like, oh, you know, we're not really like a huge fan of Kurdi, they're less of a fan of Serbia. So they're going to let, and America has a base in Kosovo. Kosovo is really just a United States base for the most part.
Well, it is, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know what will happen, but it's something that we have to keep watching for sure. I'm just hoping that, I don't think that BRICS is going to allow, like China and Russia is going to allow Serbia to get forcibly pushed into NATO or forcibly pushed into another war.
Yeah, I really think that the European Union is not going to last much longer. I think NATO is collapsing. And especially when you look at, you know, what's going on in Ukraine, Ukraine is on its last legs. It's not going to be able to continue any much longer, you know. Sarah, when you look at Serbia, what would you say is your favorite thing about Serbian culture? And like the one thing that, you know, when you look at like the original leader of Yugoslavia, Tito, what was your favorite, you know, political, you know, quote of him? Like your favorite thing?
I don't know about Tito. My favorite quote of Tito, I don't know. I do love the way Tito dresses, 100%. I love Serbia because I think that Serbia has been the Slavic country who's stayed the closest to their roots, the closest to their history, the least amount of Western influence. They've upheld their Orthodox values very strongly. And they've been through so much adversity. I mean, they didn't have the greatest time under Tito. Serbs were massacred just alongside of the Jews during World War II. And then you have the 90s, the Yugoslavia, and now we're starting with them again. Serbs have gone through so much, and as a people to continue to fight, that just says like an enormous amount. It speaks volumes about them as a nation.
She also just mentioned when I was saying the Kosovo leader, here it is.
Little Zelensky.
Yeah, he was called, for years, he was now called Listen to Sensi, simple truth that Kurd is a hyper-nationalist. Thank you for saying we were ethnically cleansed. Once we weren't killed, 250,000 Serbs were expelled. She very quickly did that. Very greatly.
They've always been ethnically cleansed, and everybody has done that their due diligence to hide it. So even in World War II, I mean, that's one thing that, like, you know, I know the Jews get like most of the focus from the Holocaust, but Serbs were annihilated during the Holocaust. The Ustasha said, you know, we're going to convert a third of them, we're going to kill a third of them, and we'll make the other third move or something like that. They've always been a target of ethnic cleansing. So that was the Croats. And then the 90s, NATO came and used the Albanians to ethnically cleanse the Serbs from Kosovo, and then lied about it, and then said, oh, Kosovo's majority Albanian. No, it's not, and it never was. Like, so they've always been a target, and it's because they've stayed true to their Slavic roots and held strong onto their orthodoxy and their relations with Russia. Also, the United States has always had a grudge against Serbia because they look at it as Serbia took the leftover Yugoslavia bit, right? So whereas Russia took the leftover USSR bit, Serbia gets the leftover Yugoslavia bit. So all of the stuff that the United States hated about Yugoslavia is now transferred onto the Serbs. So like the United States had a very large bone to pick with Yugoslavia because Tito helped to start the non-aligned movement and refused to choose sides during the Cold War. That's a grudge that the United States has never let go of and had to crush it in the 90s because once Russia was weakened, it was time to go after the other communist bloc, Yugoslavia. You also have to realize the United States used Yugoslavia as a buffer to Russia because Yugoslavia was fine with being a kind of a they had their relations broke with Russia, but they were still a communist or socialist country and kind of doing their own thing, but they weren't quite as communist as the USSR. So the United States could still deal with them. Once the USSR had collapsed, there was no longer a need for Yugoslavia anymore because there was no need for a buffer. There was no more Eastern Germany. There was no more USSR. There was no more communist bloc. So Yugoslavia could go too. And it's better not to have any of these communist entities. So the United States went in there and did what they had to do and destroyed Yugoslavia. And then you have it continuously happen where there's just uprisings or little bits of violence, or somebody starts in Kosovo, or KFOR starts with something else. And it's always like something to pick on the Serbs. Or even a year ago when they forced Serbia to hold the Pride Parade. That's just a provocation that they're doing on purpose to bother the Serbs. They do it constantly. I mean, even in the Yugoslav wars, the amount of arms trafficking, the United States flew in terrorists from the Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda in there to fight alongside the Bosnians.
I knew.
Just the amount of stuff that we've thrown at the Serbs and they've been able to stand through the adversity is incredible. And I think that they deserve a tremendous amount of respect, and for people to just leave them the hell alone. Like, it's been long enough. So
when you look at like Yugoslavia, how different do you think the world would be if Yugoslavia still exists? How different do you think it would be? How different do you think it would be if it still exists? How would Europe be economically and socially if Yugoslavia somehow managed to survive?
Yugoslavia would have never been able to survive because it eventually would have had to be broken up, because the reason why Yugoslavia was broken up was because they wanted the Croats and the Slovenes to join the EU because they had money, right? And they were kind of the economic powerhouses of Yugoslavia. So Slovenia got to kind of slink away during the like the tumult in the 90s and join the EU. So I mean, Yugoslavia was slated for destruction. The only way Yugoslavia could have survived is if the USSR survived. So I don't think that that's even like a hypothetical that I could even explore, because they could have never joined the EU as a bloc like that. The EU would have never allowed it. So they would have just been a constant outcast, and they would have been under attack economically or militarily at all times.
So she also mentioned here, Lady of the Balkans also says here, Croatians who were worse than Nazis in World War II we were killed brutally in, what's that place pronounced?
Jasenovac.
Georgia and other camps, and now it's Albanians who are doing that with, of course, organ harvesting and human trafficking. So when she mentions about the organ harvesting and stuff, which is the same type, it's, when you look at that, it's the same type of stuff that you're seeing happening in Ukraine. Like the Ukrainian government is kidnapping like Eastern Russians and doing organ harvesting to them. It's absolutely insane. What is your opinion towards that, Sarah?
Oh, that's been well-known fact about the Albanians, the arms and the organ harvesting and human trafficking. A lot of the UN officers wanted to go to Albania because they could buy women, literally buy women from Albanians. So the organ trade, the arms dealers, like that, all of that, that's well known. And we we always joke. We always jokingly say that Albania is the Ukraine of the Balkans, because it's just so corrupt and like it's like the wild west. So I mean, I don't really think anything of it. To me, I think it's common knowledge. I mean, most people don't realize they had boxes of blank passports so they could give them to terrorists in the Balkans. Like it was crazy. It was complete lawlessness and just bombing Serbia. So it chaos.
So speaking of that, Sarah, your podcast, DD Geopolitics, what would you say is the most like fun, the most interesting, like what would you say has been your most favorite interview that you've done, and one that you really like to watch over and over again? And what would you say was the most fascinating talk you ever had with someone?
Dugan is my most fascinating talk by far. But my favorite guest or my favorite episodes are always Pepe Escobar, because he is so positive and just he's just a good vibes all the time. But interviewing Dugan was like, I sound so corny, but there was some sort of energy. I don't know. Like afterwards, both myself and Lydia were like, what just happened? Like he's, whether you agree with him or not, it wasn't even about that. It was just very mystifying. The way that he talks, the things that he talks about, his wealth of knowledge, just it was just I've listened to it at least 4 times. So yeah, that was probably my most fascinating. But I love Pepe. He's like a ball of good energy. I love all my guests. I can't think of a show that I was like, this is miserable. I'm trying to think, but I can't recall one that I didn't like. We always have good shows.
They're very good. I really enjoy them. I would have to say my one was probably the Dugan show. That was a good, the one you did with Dugan. When you look at Alexander Dugan, what would you say like is your favorite like ideology of his, and like his favorite like quote that he's ever said in his book that you really like?
Well, I liked part of the interview where we could talk about Ruski Mir, which is just the Russian world, which is very hard to explain because it's more than what you would translate it in English. I don't know how to explain it, but when he talks about that, and he talks about like, people say nationalism and they say it with such a stigma, but nationalism doesn't always have to be a bad thing. And I don't think that his version of nationalism is necessarily bad. It's like a lot of reverence for the Russian culture, a lot of reverence for Russian history. So I respect that about him. And a lot of people think he's close to fascist. I wouldn't really agree. I would agree that he's kind of nationalist. And then he has his own ideology of Eurasianism, which I mean is fascinating. It reminds me of kind of like Mackinder maybe, but I don't know. I just find him to be a very fascinating individual. And And the thing about the interview that was so inspiring is we didn't talk about Dasha at all. I didn't want to talk about her. I didn't think that she should be the focus. It had already been a year by the time we did the interview, so I didn't want to bring her up. But at the end, like, I think it was towards the end of the interview, and he was very much like, Russia will win. Like, this is, and just the how certain he was, and this is a man who lost his daughter in this war, and he still says this war is necessary. We will win. It was inevitable. It had to be done. So that's just another level of like selflessness, and people look at it as like he doesn't even care about his daughter, and that's 100% not true. He's written like stuff about her that's like so moving. She's literally a hero. He like allows her as such, but his idea, or it's more so the sacrifice is horrible, but the sacrifice, maybe it was necessary, kind of, in a way.
Yeah, it was terrible, for her to die. It was just very lovely girl. I saw her in an interview, very knowledgeable, she was. It's such a shame. With your podcast going forward, Sarah, what would you say would be your dream guest? Like, if you actually, out of anyone in history, who would you love to bring on your show, and like, what would you like to talk about that? Like, one thing you would love to talk about that person with?
I don't know. Now I'm like looking at my books. I'd really like to talk to maybe Kim Jong-un or Fidel Castro. And maybe even the Ayatollah. I would want to talk to one of these isolationist kind of countries, leaders, and understand how sanctions affected them. Actually, you know what? Scratch all of that. Just if I could talk to one person, it would be Bashar al-Assad. That's who I would talk to. And why would I talk to him? Because if you look at the Arab Spring and the way that it swept across the Arab states, how many states fell, and for Assad to not fall, people don't give him the credit that he's due. If he would have fallen, that would have been the end. That could have been an enormous world war. Who knows what would have happened to the Middle East? It would have been absolutely steamrolled. He's really the only leader that could hold on after what happened to Gaddafi and what happened to Egypt and Tunisia. And he is owed a tremendous amount of credit for standing up to not only the Turks, but to the United States and ISIS, backed by both of them, and the Kurds and everybody. So I would talk to Assad.
That would be very, very cool to speak to him. Sarah, when you look at with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, what do you think is going to happen to Ukraine? Do you think that Ukraine will just give up? Do you think it will be so a lot of people say this, how do you see the future of Ukraine's map? Do you think Western Ukraine will just remain Western Ukraine, or will be taken by Russia? And do you think the other parts of Ukraine will be taken by Poland and Moldova? How do you see the future of Ukraine going forward? And how do you think the world, will be? Do you think that China and Russia will become the superpower of the world? And if they do, with it becoming more multipolar, how do you think China and Russia will be as the world's superpowers going forward?
Okay. The Ukraine thing. I don't think that Russia necessarily wants to go all the way west. I think that would be way more trouble than it's worth. 100%. I think that they still just want the territories that they originally were sought after, up to the Dnieper River. That's what I think would be the best, and the land bridge, including Odessa, all the way to Transnistria. Moldova's not in a place of strength to negotiate anything. I mean, they can't even afford their gas. They owe Russia money for gas. So I don't think that they're in a place to negotiate anything. And if Transnistria were to be a point of contention, I'm sure that would go to Russia, because they would probably prefer it. Hungary also has a stake in those lands there as well, and Hungarians are being ethnically cleansed by Ukrainians. And then, of course, like you mentioned, Poland, who has a very huge stake in Western Ukraine, namely Galicia. I think that Ukraine should still have a state at the end of this. Do I think that they will? I don't think so. You know, as the more escalation, every time there's an escalation, Russia says the same thing. If you continue to escalate, then our demands change, or our demands become more intense. Poland is also poising itself to become the most armed and largest military in the EU, maybe eventually surpassing Turkey. I mean, they're thinking we're going to be the new buffer to Russia, right? Before Ukraine was taking all of these weapons and training, they were being armed and trained by the United States, Canada, Australia, and Britain for decades. The United States since the 1940s, actually. But so if now Poland is saying we're the new buffer up against Russia, where does that mean that they're moving into Western Ukraine to meet up with Russia? So I think that Poland does have a vested interest in those lands. They're very contentious. There's a lot of bloody history in Western Ukraine between Poland and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then Hungary is very pissed, and rightfully so. And I think Slovakia even mentioned wanting to get a peace.
Yeah. What is your opinion on the new Slovakia leader that just won his election?
He says all the right things, but as we know, Georgia Maloney said a lot of the right things too, and she turned out to be a complete opposite of what she campaigned on. He's part of Orban's bloc, which Orban helps fund parties and campaigns, and he's one of those candidates that was backed by Orban, so that's a good sign. So if he sticks to the things that he's saying, I think he's fantastic. I don't think that Slovakia is a small nation. You know, we think we're in the United States. We forget how tremendous we are. These are tiny little nations. I mean, Slovenia only has 2 million people in it. Slovakia shouldn't have to be pressured into giving arms and production over to Ukraine. They should own their own labor. They should keep their own labor in the country. The Baltics have already completely disarmed themselves. So why should a leader, especially of a Slavic nation, continue to disarm themselves to fight Russia, who's seen as like the motherland of Slavs? It's just it doesn't make any sense to me. So I hope that he sticks to his guns, pun intended maybe, but I hope he sticks to his guns and he continues down this path. I think he will, because he was sponsored by Orban, and Orban's still in office. So at least they'll kind of be like a team in a sense where they back each other up.
You know, speaking of that, as we all know, the United States right now is going through probably the most craziest time in its history right now, you could argue. How do you see the future of America? Because some people say we could see civil war happening, and some people say that the country could be on the verge of collapse, especially being $31 trillion of debt, broken infrastructure, broken social system. How do you see, do you think the United States is going to survive? And when you look at the political persecution of Trump, whether you agree with him or not, which is pretty much, just unfair what they're doing to him, and also what they're doing to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., how do you think the United States will be? Do you think the United States will somehow survive, or do you think it will collapse like the Roman Empire? And how similar do you think it is? How similar do you think the collapse of the United States right now is to the Roman Empire? Since that's trends going on TikTok right now.
Is it? I don't have a TikTok account, but I'm kind of a pessimist when it comes to the United States, optimist for the rest of the world, pessimist for the United States. I don't know if it will collapse, but we are watching a serious degradation of society. And see, me as a communist, I don't see it as the fall of the Roman Empire. I see it as the bourgeoisie decadence has completely gotten out of control, and a communist revolution is absolutely needed. I mean, when you get into this point of
a French Revolution, the French Revolution.
Exactly. When you get to this point of degradation and the collapse of cultural norms, you need to fall into a communal, like, working class movement, or you wind up falling into populism and fascism. Like, those are there's got to be some kind of give. Do I think we'll end up in a civil war? Absolutely not. You can't get Americans off their asses to go, like, I don't like, we have more guns than people. There's no reason we should be in the situation that we're in. Everybody always screams about Second Amendment, Second Amendment. I've never seen anybody use it to fix anything, but we all complain about the government. But we need our guns in case the government comes after us, right? But they're already after us. So I don't see a civil war happening. Plus, if they did, the blue states would be steamrolled in like a second. That would be ridiculous. I see a complete degradation of culture on purpose. Just complete decadence and degeneracy. Like, you wouldn't even believe the things that people are willing to accept, the things that people are willing to allow in public. It's just a society that has no business to continue. Look at the looting that's happening. New York City was just under like 10 feet of water. This is supposed to be the greatest city in the world. It can't even handle a storm.
Nope.
And that's not because of climate change. That's because of infrastructure. Our trains are derailing left and right. Our kids are just roving around in gangs, assaulting people for TikTok views. Like, what is even going on? It's like woke imperialism to the max. And you know what they always say? They say foreign policy becomes domestic policy. So all of the shit that we've caused around the world is all coming home. So all of the destruction that we've done to the global south, to the Middle East, and to Africa, they're all immigrating to the United States. All of the global homo and cultural imperialism we tried to import on everybody else, it's causing the collapse of our own society. We have no values. We have no idea what's going on. We don't even know what gender we are anymore. I think last I checked, there's 90 something. And these are the things that we're concerned about when we could be looking at a multipolar world. We're so hyper focused on holding on to our hegemony, while the culture and our kids behind us are getting absolutely destroyed. So yes, I do think there's a collapse coming. I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, unless there's like a real catalyst that happens. We're kind of waiting right now for the economic collapse. Most of my financial friends are saying that it's coming. So that'll be really interesting when that happens, because China will not be bailing us out like they did in 2008. So we've already drained all of the economy out of the EU. So I don't really know who's going to save us. But yeah, I'm going to read the comments, because do you think Trump will get a fair trial? Okay, the Trump thing, I'm going to be totally upfront with you. I'm not paying attention to it because I think it's ridiculous. I'm not a Trumpster. Would I vote for him? Yes. But I'm not the biggest fan of Trump. I don't agree with all of his policies. But how are you going to do this? This is the type of stuff that happens in other countries. And then CNN talks about how they're a banana republic. This is such a joke. The woman going after Trump has campaigned on going after Trump. You're not even allowed to do that. Just complete corruption. Banana republic. Rules for me, or rules for thee, but none for me. There's different rules for Democrats. There's some rules for Republicans. Nobody knows what's going on. Somebody pulled a fire alarm at Congress the other day. Like, everything is just chaos. It's a shit show here. I don't know. Like, I'm so disenchanted with it. Like I said, I think I said it before we came on the show. I haven't been even really interested in United States politics since 2016. Because it doesn't matter. We're still on the same collision course, and nothing's going to change about foreign policy either. I don't know. I don't think he'll get a fair trial. They've already shown that it's a complete kangaroo court. None of the lawyers on either side know what they're doing. So it's like their guess is as good as mine.
Sarah, going back to the one question about guns. A lot of conservatives in America say that, like, in the Soviet Union and in China, like Mao Zedong, he took a lot of, guns away from people. And like in Soviet Union, a lot of people say that Stalin took a lot of guns from people. When actually, though, a lot of communists and socialists say that's not actually true. What is your opinion towards that? Do you think they're like telling the truth, or do you think they're lying?
I mean, regardless, what it doesn't matter because all the guns here in America and they're not doing anything with them. So what's the difference? They already got everybody to go into lockdown and get vaccinated and put masks on. Nobody stopped that with all the guns that are here. Nobody stopped any of that. So what's the difference if Mao comes and takes your guns? You're going to be the same society that you were the day before because nobody here does anything with their guns. All they ever talk about is the need for them, and they tell us it's to overthrow a tyrannical government. But I mean, we've been living under a tyrannical government since Obama, maybe even George W. Bush, and nobody's ever done anything with a gun. So, I mean, what's the difference? At least we'd be safer. I don't even want to go to the movie theater like for fear of getting shot. Like, at least we'd be safer at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what I was meaning is there's a thing that socialists say that Mao and Stalin actually didn't take the guns. What is your opinion towards that?
I mean, I don't. Stalin didn't take guns. With Mao, I'm not 100%. I mean, I can't. How can you fault two different nations that took themselves from peasantry and serfdom into a industrial powerhouse and two global powers? Like, you can't, there's nothing, whether they took the guns or not, it doesn't matter. They still they hyper advanced as societies. They caught up to their Western counterparts in like, it's like a fraction of the time that their Western counterparts had to develop. So whatever they did was working.
Mm-hmm. So, Sarah, before we finish up today, what would you like to say to the audience, and what was the last thing you would like to say to them?
I want to tell people to be at least a little bit optimistic and to not be scared of the United States losing its hegemony. It's okay. It's power sharing is okay. You see countries like China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, who have been forced by us to be isolationist and to not have tourists and to maybe not participate so much in diplomacy, are now coming out of those shells. Iran is opening up their borders for tourism, China as well. Making it easier for other people to visit, but not Americans. So at the end of the day, like, if we keep on holding on to this idea of America as the single hegemon, we're going to be the ones isolated in the end. Like, if we don't learn about multipolarity and how to do power sharing, we're going to be the ones left out in the cold in the end. And I would really hate for that to happen because there's a lot of tremendous things are happening around the world, and the United States won't get to participate in them if they don't like swallow their pride a little bit.
So anyways, thank you, Sarah, for coming on. Where can people find you?
Oh my God. Okay. Just go to DD Geopolitics.com and then you'll find Rumble, Substack, Locals, Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, all of the above, whatever platforms you guys like the most.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say it was a pleasure having you, Sarah. You do really great political work. I love the work you do with your also your co-workers at the DD Geopolitics. I think you do a great job. Ladies and gentlemen, please go follow Sarah and DD Geopolitics. They do an absolute fantastic job with their shows. Very good. They're very knowledgeable when it comes to, politics around the world. You'll have a great time listening to their shows. You will not be bored or anything. It's an absolute pleasure to listen to them. So please, like I said, ladies and everybody, go follow them, give them a like, give them all, the respect they deserve. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Sarah. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 131 today. Sarah, I'd love to have you back on, another time in the future.
Definitely.
Sounds absolutely great. And thank you, Sarah, for coming on. God bless you. And I just want to say, everybody, God bless you for joining the show. Take care. Have a nice day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.